I say good morning. Thank you for joining us for the first roundtable of 2023. My name is Matthew Baird. I am the founder of the Social Housing Roundtable. I started these initially during lockdown as a way to keep in touch and get people talking about something other than the fact that the pandemic was a nightmare. And they've kind of grown and grown into this amazing networking group that I love and love running. So thank you everybody who's involved, who continues to be involved, who's guest speaking and who's kind of joining as another guest speaker this year, I guess. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Becky Tucker, who is joining us for the first roundtable of the year. Did we connect via LinkedIn, Becky? I'm sure that's how we first got in touch.
Yes, it was, yeah.
The power of, we were just talking just before we came on actually, about the power of social media and all that it's done, and the roundtables wouldn't be what they were without it. So I'm still grateful for it, and certainly glad that we met through there. To anyone who doesn't know me or who is new to the roundtables, I am in the process of letting people in whilst I'm doing these introductions. Whilst I'm the founder of the Social Housing Roundtable, I've been doing social housing recruitment now for the last 10 years. I've recruited from kind of officer level right up to chief exec. And I keep these free, and I always intend to keep these free because I think it's so important that there are free networking groups out there. I think so many of them are so expensive when you go to these events, but they are free because so many of you in this room have recruited with me at one time or another, or will potentially be doing so soon. So the more of you that do, the longer I can keep them running for free. So that's the end of the recruitment plug. I'm going to pass it over to Becky now to kind of introduce today's topic, where the idea of it kind of came from, really, and I guess what to expect from today's session. So Becky, please, over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Matt, and hello everybody. So yes, as Matt said, I'm Becky Tucker, and I'm founder of a risk management consultancy business called House of Risk, but I am not apologising for that because I feel like I'm different to the usual consultants, and I know that you'll probably all say that, but I'm absolutely personally passionate about risk management, and particularly in the context of our sector, the social housing sector. And you know, given my strong background in this area, I feel like I'm okay to say that. I've worked in 5 housing associations over around 13 years, with the first being just around 3,500 property stock, right up to the most recent with the merger between Catalyst and Peabody, which has over 100,000 properties. So you can see the evolution of my career as we've gone through that time. I really look forward to getting to know some of you throughout the session today. I know these sessions are really great for that networking bit. And for some of you on the call that I recognise, you'll know that I'm really passionate about that networking piece as well. So the format for today's roundtable is much like our usual approach that Matt offers. And that is that I will start with a roundup of the risks for 2023 as I see them, linking those to the sector risk profile. So for those of you that have not been exposed before, the regulator for social housing produce a sector risk profile, and they do that on an annual basis, usually around about October time. Is when I start getting excited because it's my favourite publication of the year. Yes, sorry, I'm that sad. And then once we've run through my sort of state of the nation, if you like, if you want to call it that, then we'll open up for some conversation, because that's the best bit, and some questions if you've got them.
Absolutely. If anyone has any questions or points you'd like to make at any time during the initial part, please put them in the chat. Or if you feel so inclined, please raise your hand at any time. I can bring you into the conversation then. Obviously, we'll probably do more of that once you've done your initial piece, Becky, and we'll go from there. But I'll pass over to you to start the state of the nation. I quite like that as a starting point for the beginning of the year, which, if it isn't anything other than dumpster fire, I'm not sure, but maybe that's just me being pessimistic.
We should have called it that, shouldn't we? State of the nation.
The dumpster fire of 2023.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we missed a trick there. Come on. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to apologise up front. What I've got to talk to you about is not the most positive. And I can't do anything about that. That's the environment, our operating environment as we work in at the moment. I'm going to start off with building safety as kind of a top ticket item on my list of things to talk to you about today. And that is around the new Building Safety Act, which was passed in 2022, which many of you have already seen about. And this is a result of government changing the landscape for all those in that kind of built environment, if you like. It's difficult to judge at this early stage how the new legislation will operate, but I think watch this risk area though, as there's secondary legislation coming out into force in 2023, including the introduction of a new gateways 2 and 3 to the development. So we've got gateway 1, which is the kind of planning process as we see it, as we traditionally see planning, but then we've got a stop-go point with gateway 2 and a gateway 3 of a final sign-off for that property build. So quite a change actually in terms of those stages and step processes. There's also this kind of latest draft legislation to be published in this area, Higher Risk Building Regulations 2023, which will actually define the tall buildings subject to additional fire and building safety legislation requirements. There are no surprises there. Tall buildings will remain residential buildings which have at least 18 meters in height or at least 7 stories. And include buildings under construction. So there's no change there, but I do encourage you to look out for that legislation as it comes along. The regulations also define what a building is, and I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but actually there's been quite a lot of debates, particularly in the insurance environment. So the definition of a building is likely to have wider implications, as will so much of the Building Safety Act itself, particularly for insurance, as I mentioned. And speaking of insurance, that's next on our risk list, if you like, and could have been first for me in terms of the implications of some of this stuff on your budgets back at Ranch. So really listen in if this is of interest to you. So insurance for 2023 requires a mention all of its own in my view. I've broken this down into some key things that we need to be focusing on. The global insurance industry faces pressures from high inflation, natural catastrophe loss, volatile financial markets, all the doom and gloom, and we expect the hardening of rates to continue throughout 2023 as we saw last year. Of particular note though, I wanted to highlight a couple of points for you in the housing sector, and that is around property valuations and your insurable valuations. This is not new to providers, that we need to undertake this regular valuation of properties to ensure that rebuild value remains sufficient and that we're not at risk of over or indeed under-insuring in this area. I think one of the biggest risk areas is being underinsured, of course, as this could result in insurers paying some insurers declared, not the actual value of the rebuild, leaving organisations to pay that shortfall, which could, of course, be a substantial and unexpected cost to the organisation, particularly if you're talking about a high-rise or a high-value property in the first place. In between stock valuations, it's standard practice to increase your sums insured in line with the house rebuilding cost index. We all do this in the sector when you do insurance retenders and renewals. And this is percentage calculated based on the average cost of labour, materials, professional fees, and is applied to your sums insured to reduce your exposure to being underinsured. For many years, this figure I've seen in the region of 3 to 5% increase as a natural uplift. We just kind of add it on and not really think much about it. That's become a problem because the construction materials shortage of the past 2 years, although have eased, prices remain significantly high across that and continue into 2023. The cost of building materials have soared, following on from the impacts of pandemic and Brexit, leading to those material shortages, the problems in shipping stuff into the UK in the first place. And this year, costs have continued to arise amid the high inflation, higher than the past 40 years, and therefore materials are forecast to rise to 18% during 2023. So when construction costs are escalating at that current rate, providers definitely run the risk of becoming significantly underinsured unless you're really reviewing and reassessing that total building sum insured regularly. So this means your insurance, your property insurance premium could instantly increase by 18% just by doing this exercise, if nothing else is to be taken into consideration by those material cost increases alone, if you haven't been doing this regularly. And this is regardless of any agreements you've got in place with your insurer, by the way, and before you consider anything like your growth in property portfolio and claims experience. So a real area of focus. So I absolutely encourage you to, if you don't have insurance in your remit, to go and speak to the people that do, because that's a really important point. And then the second topic in the kind of topic of insurance I want to talk about is cyber. And we all probably groan a little bit now when we hear about the conversation around cyber, but actually insurers are demanding much more detailed information now about how cyber risks are managed, and requiring organisations to have minimum security standards in place before offering any cover at all, i.e. some insurers are not actually offering you cover. Even if there's the best security infrastructure in place in your organisations, this doesn't, of course, guarantee you that you won't become a victim of cyber breach, and that there's always that significant risk of human error. I know in my career I've seen many a time, certainly in the data protection remit, and I noticed Claire's in the call today, so I won't be covering this too much, but hi Claire. So essentially talking about you know, that human error point around data protection breaches is a big deal. We all make mistakes. Turning off your autocorrect complete in your email line is a hot topic for me, and one that I'm always encouraging organisations to do, because it's so easy to, you know, click enter and off it goes to the most random people. Anyway, so yeah, cyber insurance, focus on it, make sure that you're demonstrating good security measures in place, and that you're providing regular training and making sure that's undertaken to raise awareness of those breaches within your organisations. This can only help in securing your cyber cover insurance as well. And quite often I find this a challenging conversation with IT teams as well. They're saying, oh, but we've got all this stuff in place, we don't need cyber insurance. For me, I've absolutely fallen back on using cyber insurance cover myself personally. I was previously data protection officer in my previous roles. And one of the things for me around making sure that you've got cover in place is making sure you've got that support mechanism behind the scenes when something does go wrong. So it's not just about the value of the claim, but more so about the expertise you can pull in as a result of that cyber. So if you're struggling, don't necessarily talk about the money, but talk about the support factor that you've got waiting in the wings just in case things do go wrong. Okay, so next up we've got damp and mould. I'm sorry, we haven't got far through the conversation in risk without talking about damp and mould, and you've guessed it, its relationship to reputation. So I mentioned earlier the Regulator for Social Housing Sector Risk Profile that was published in October last year, where they played a huge emphasis on reputation, mentioning it no less than 17 times in a document which is only 23 pages long. So you can get the gist of what I'm trying to get here. Reputation in the sector is a high risk at the moment. So I guess reinforced by stories in the media, and particularly around damp and mould. This is a significant threat to residents, of course, and enforcement is predicted to be strong in this area following, of course, that horrible, tragic incident where the Coroner's Court captured national attention last year. In short, a family who lived in a property managed by a housing association had made repeated complaints about widespread damp and mould. And then tragically, 2-year-old Aweb Ishaq, living at the property, passed away in 2020. And the coroner decided that the death was a result of prolonged exposure to mould. So really focused our attention in the sector around this particular risk, but also the spotlight from the media as well. So that high profile coverage we saw took swift government intervention, which means we expect a particular focus expected by providers to tackle this and similar issues, whether by property management measures such as increased inspections and mitigation measures, enforcement where the issue is actually the occupier's responsibility, and then that proactive prevention. And on that point, tenant satisfaction. So we'll all be aware here that the tenant satisfaction measures take effect from April 2023. Social housing providers that do not already have processes in place to collect and record data on these, you absolutely need to have this sorted. There's a lot to do. Providers will, from April 23, be required to measure 22 key tenant measure satisfaction metrics. And this information relating to areas such as repairs and safety checks must then be published and submitted to the regulator for assessment. So really get your act together if you're not. Most registered providers that I speak to certainly have processes in place or are well on that journey to capture that data required. And of course, that leads to all sorts of issues around data and data quality, and joining the dots between what I call that kind of pyramid, or that triangle, or sometimes that square even, where you join the dots between your insurance claims, your complaints coming in, your disrepair claims, versus your data protection subject access requests. So all of those things are real indicators of things going wrong in the organisation, certainly around these areas around disrepair and damp and mould, for example. I continue the doom and gloom. We next carry on with the macroeconomic and financial environment, and providers will continue to need to be taking cautious approach here. To borrowing, particularly in 2023, turning away from new capital market transactions and favouring that more short-term revolving credit facilities. Anybody that manages risk in the room today, I encourage you to get involved in your treasury team activity and open up the conversations around your stress testing, etc. Whilst borrowing for new homes is, for obvious reasons, less required now, borrowing remains necessary for the restricted income following rent caps, as providers need to meet and fund new legislative and climate change requirements too. So a key concern here is the constrained resources and significantly increased uncertainty with deteriorating macroeconomic environment. Providers will need to continue to meet its core objectives though, and that's called out very clearly in the sector risk profile by the regulator, and they need to deliver these in line with strategic direction. So really keep your eye on what you set out to achieve during 2023 is a really key and important point to make, whilst mitigating that economic, social and financial impacts that you might be facing too. No easy feat, there's no real kind of balance there. You've just got to make the right choices and focus on what you said was important. Those are the trade-offs that the regulator is talking about within the document too, to carefully maintain that viability. Your G's and V's are really important to you, and really making sure that you're compliant within those, while prioritising essential services and safety and demonstrating the organisation is providing value for money. Easy, right? Okay, so then next we talk about a little bit around a pause in the housing market. So I alluded to that just now with the lack of financial need for new builds, because there's a lack of need for new builds. And I guess affordability concerns and the end of Help to Buy is certainly prompting a short pause in the housing market. So affordability of new homes will absolutely dominate much of 2023, I think, as the cost of living crisis sees would-be buyers holding off or unable to secure mortgage products in the same way as they would be able to previously at affordable rates. And then this coincides with the end of the success, I want to call it, of the Help to Buy scheme in March. Another potential perfect storm perhaps for the housing market. I think watch this space very closely. The First Homes scheme launched last year may take up some of the Help to Buy slack. It's very different product though. If you don't already know about it, read up, have a look, understand it. The effects of first home on shared ownership sales remains to be seen. We just may move one risk to another. Let's see. Another area of interesting risk, I think, is the social care and assisted living environment. And whilst this doesn't apply to every housing association, because I know a lot of housing associations have discharged this responsibility and no longer provide this, there are still significant organisations that do. I guess this crisis, as we see it in social care and assisted living, isn't looking like it's improving much during 2023. Every year, social care and assisted living providers call for the government to bring forward and prioritise its policy proposals in this area. However, this is a problem seemingly too big to solve for the government. And so we still don't see any indication of resolutions on the horizon here. I think it just needs to be moved from the too difficult pile and put into a priority list for anything to happen meaningfully in this area, but we shall see. And then finally, I just wanted to round up my kind of whistle-stop tour of risk for 2023 as I see it with the TikTok boom. I'm trying to add a little bit of light to this, but actually not necessarily. You hear the words lit and bruh and major key before. Well, me not so much, and I probably don't pronounce them very well. But these are just a few examples of what you'll be hearing in the mouths of what we call the Gen Zers, as they use lit to describe something cool, apparently, and call a close friend bruh, B-R-U-H, did you know? And refer to something essential as major key. There you go, who knew? This reworking, I think, of the English language is becoming the beginning of the Gen Z's influence. And who are they? Who are these Gen Z's? Well, they're the individuals born between the mid-70s and the early 2010s. Generation Z is the first with no experience of life without the internet.
97, wasn't it?
Say again?
96, 97 to about 2010, wasn't it?
No. So from 1980 onwards is Generation Z, and if you're the older end of that, which in fact I am, you are a geriatric Generation Z.
I was under the impression that it was like beforehand was like millennial, and now and Gen Z was about 96, 97 to about 2010. I think there's so many different forms.
Yeah, that's it. So there's Generation Y, I think, is the prior, the millennials, and then those born in the mid 1990s, 96 time, through to the early 2010s, and now these Generation Zs. It fascinated me to think that they have no experience of life without the internet. That really kind of shook home for me, that thought. So digital devices and social media have connected them across borders to create this kind of first truly global generation. So this Gen Z basically grew up with the internet, grew up with YouTube, and this is still their favorite website for the generation, meaning they're more likely to use this platform than others like Facebook or Instagram, for example. So in addition, Gen Z sees emails as outdated, really, being 3 times more likely to open a chat message, and 1 in 5 stating that Snapchat influences their purchase decisions. I didn't even know that you had purchase decisions on Snapchat, but anyway, that's double their millennial counterparts, as we were talking about just now. But I guess, why am I talking about this here? Well, this for me is a prompt to providers. The social housing sector need to get ready for this next generation of new customer. There are, have you got appropriate plans in place to get tech ready, to respond to new approach to customers? It really just is a small provocation to me to end my roundup and open up our discussion to the floor, really.
I think also on that massive piece around kind of recruitment and staffing and how we're going to engage with our future workforce is absolutely key. So well, that was, like I say, very much a whistle-stop tour, but thank you, Becky. It was an amazing kind of overview there. I think it really, I know you started it by saying it's all doom and gloom, but actually, yes, it's not going to be an easy year, but I don't think anyone was going into this year feeling it was going to be easy. And I think particularly with the media narrative and suddenly government saying there's an issue with social housing and all the rest of it, regardless of political connotations. I think we knew it was going to be a challenging one. However, I think it's also going to be quite an exciting one because there's going to be so much change. There's going to have to be, and there's going to have to be, unfortunately, times of terrible news stories that came out as they did last year do lead to change and do kind of enforce what comes next. Is there an area you kind of would like to start from any of those to kind of open up the discussion, or would you rather kind of someone else? I don't know if anybody has a question they'd kind of like to ask of Becky or to anybody else from the members who are on today. Gurmeet, I can see you've come off mute. Goodness me, it's been a while since I've done one of these and not remember the word mute. So please, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, no, Becky, thank you. That was really insightful and helpful. Just the latter bit, we're in a full employment economy at the moment, and most housing providers are struggling to both retain and or recruit new. So this, and this TikTok thing's, new to me. So what do we need to do that's new and make us more attractive to the millenniums to get to make housing a place where we could work, and what are the risks associated with doing something completely different in recruiting people to what we do currently?
I think but I'm going to hand off to Matt in a second because this is his area of expertise and I can see he's poised, ready to go. But one of the things that I want to say, and the reason why I brought up this topic to the table, is more about how we are engaging with our customer. So what we're doing at the moment is very traditional. We are expecting engagement with our customer, our resident, our tenant, whatever you call them in your organisation. We're expecting that level of engagement to remain the same. We continue, we dibble and we dabble with a little bit of innovation, as we call it in this area. I think we need to change the game. I think we need to up our game in terms of that technology and how we're using it. So some organisations have gone down the route of having an app where they've got a resident app that can check their rent account, etc. And by the way, be careful from a data protection perspective with that one. I've experienced issues personally on that one. So I guess what I'm saying here is more about move with the technology. We cannot be seen to be just continuing to engage with our customer in the way that we always have. Customers, bear in mind, can now, particularly from pandemic purposes, where people have done more shopping online, Amazon boxes arrived at my door on a daily basis during the pandemic and probably haven't stopped now because that's changed the way that I shop. And that's a really interesting aspect of customer service. I can now order an item in the morning and it come by tea time in my property. That is the type of customer service that our residents are experiencing elsewhere. And so my thoughts around the technology risk is do not get left behind within that sector and do not provide dissatisfaction to residents as a result. And Matt, recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, there's two people in the room alongside yourself who would be brilliant for this, both Claire, who I'm going to bring in a moment, and if anybody's not engaged with Joe Leckie, please do, because her whole thing is customer satisfaction, and we've talked a number of times about tech and what's going on next. There's a big piece, it's going to be difficult because there is a massive need to engage that next kind of cohort of staff to come through, and the next generation. Things like WhatsApp, I get far more response in texting or WhatsApping a candidate now. Sorry, WhatsApping, not texting, but WhatsApping a candidate. I will get far more likely to be able to have a conversation with somebody through that and then arrange a time to call than I will through almost any other medium apart from maybe LinkedIn. Namely because nearly everyone in this room uses WhatsApp to communicate with friends, family, and everything else. It's what we've got used to. Over the last 12 months, more than 80% of my recruitment has come directly through LinkedIn. All of it, of every level, in every team. And again, that's come through people like yourself seeing it and recommending people, or headhunting in the ways that I do. And I can obviously help with anybody in that capacity. But I think that there's a huge issue at the moment with the fact that we've still tried to engage with people on a business side differently to how we engage with people on a personal side. And the way technology has changed is that actually people want to communicate with people how they do regularly, as you say, Becky, through apps, through normal mediums that they consider. And things like adverts just aren't working, because unless you're really, really actively searching all of the time, when you see an advert, when you see anything pop up on your phone, you might see it for a second, 2 seconds, and then get rid of it. You're not really engaging with the whole thing. And that even happens when it is something you want to engage. You think, oh, I'll look at that later. You swipe it, get rid of it. You never go back to it because you forget about it. Which is why things like adverts and things like that aren't working on the same medium. So there is a big need. The key is branding. Don't be afraid to get involved with stuff like, I mean, TikTok's an interesting one because of all the connotations with where it comes from and who holds the data and things along those lines. But don't be afraid to try and get involved with stage social media. There are going to be people out there who are better at that than certainly I am, and recommending what's good and what's not. And Becky, I know you'll be looking continually at the risks associated, as will Claire and Joe and others in this room, but there are ways to engage with the next generation but you have to be proactive. I think that's the mindset that has to change. You now have to go out and sell yourselves as a company, as an industry, as a business, rather than hoping that people who are looking for work might see it and come to you in the way that I imagine 90% of the people, if not more in this room, fell into housing. There are so many ways to fall into other industries now because people are seeing them on various forms of media. Claire, I'm going to bring you in on that one because I can see you're patiently waiting. So over to you, and then I've got a point in the chat, and then I'm going to Denise.
Thanks, Matt. Completely agree with everything that you're saying, and obviously completely agree with everything that Becky's saying about the risks regarding data and everything else. I just wanted to say that proactive piece that Matt's talking about, we need to think about doing things in a different way and being proactive. It needs joined up thinking. And Becky's gone through a list of things, that are in the risk report, and data is one of them. It's actually, to me, it's the foundation of everything, because anything you want to do with customers, anything you want to do with colleagues, the tenant satisfaction measures, even though you've got to do them, there's still a data issue there. Anything about using new technology, new software, anything like that, it needs your data people in right at the start, your data protection people, your IT people, all around the same table, all talking together, the same way Matt brings us all together here. So that's my key message. If I could just give one message, it's to get everyone involved right at the start, so that you don't have that old thing that I know Becky's probably come up against as well, that data protection gets left to the end, and somebody's had a fantastic idea and not thought about this one bit, and then they come to us in data protection and we go, actually, I know you want to go live tomorrow, but, and then we're the bad guys.
Yeah, very, very familiar, Claire.
Yeah, I thought it might be. So yeah, that would be my thing. It's more of this kind of thing, more joined up thinking, more open conversations.
And I'd love that to be the part within that kind of sector risk piece that Becky's mentioned, is actually that we do get more of that this year, and realising that if we don't work more collaboratively, we are going to be having a number of challenges. On that, there was a couple of points in the chat, which was that Joe Lecky had mentioned, absolutely, we live in an immediate culture. Customers will expect to be able to track complaints, repairs, rent allocations, rent accounts, allocations, etc. online. And I completely agree that immediate culture is where we are now. And Anna Henderson is an interesting point about going out and selling yourself as a business to attract recruits. That's part of the original intention behind the now vilified sector awards. Couldn't agree more on that. If they'd been done the right way, I think we'd be there. But I think it almost became a plaudit for the sector, but people outside the sector still weren't seeing it. But I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that. Aaron's had to go, but really good to have seen you today. There was a point just before I bring in Denise. Sarah Jackson has said, I'd be interested to hear about any experiences that those working for registered providers have around preparing for TSMs, what's working and what's not. Becky, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. So TSM, so tenant satisfaction measures. So these are the 22 attributes that we need to be collecting. And again, all I can say to you, Sarah, is it results right back to that data quality piece again, and making sure that the measures that you've got in place are the right measures, that are giving you the real answers to the organisation. And one of the things I've seen worked really, really well in some organisations recently was, you know, having an actual panel of people that deal with data across the business in this way, coming together, having those conversations and devising new methods to recording that. So not just relying on the data and the collection that you've done previously, but actually, you know, really ring fencing this as a new topic, a new project, and making sure that you're pulling together that as a you know, a good data quality exercise throughout the organisation.
If anybody,
I'm sure lots of other people in the room are doing this.
If anyone has any experiences on that, please raise your hand, because I'd love to bring you in on that as well. Denise, I don't know if it's Denise or Denise, apologies. I'm going to bring yourself in.
Hi, I don't know how to phrase this question, but what I'm surprised not to see on the list of sector risk is actually competencies within the social housing sector. Because as somebody that's been sort of out of it for like 20 years and come back in and seen it's no better than when I left, it's sort of like there seems to be this mass assumption that the social housing sector is competent, and it's like the same old blurb over and over again, year after year. It just changes names and whatever. In tenants are no better off than they were when I left it. So that's what's jumping out at me. And the question that I want to put is sort of like, I would probably prefer Amazon to be managing my social housing tenancy than the social housing sector, just in terms of their push to be, what is it, a global customer, and they're actually demonstrating that. Whereas I just think the social housing sector seems to protect itself, and it's very incestuous, and it's very good at sort of like never allowing itself to go under proper critical scrutiny, so that the services can be improved. So I don't think that's a question. I just think it's a serious frustration, and I'm extremely surprised in the light of the social housing, social housing white paper and stuff, that is not on the sector risk. That it needs to up its game in terms of. Yeah, sorry, I've gone on a bit because I'm really frustrated.
Don't apologise at all, Becky. I'm going to pass over to you there, but I've definitely got one or two points there, because that was please don't apologise, because it was a brilliant point to make, and there were a lot of nods going on actually as you're making it. So Becky, over to you.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is our forum for being able to kind of raise those kinds of concerns. If we don't do that here, where are we going to do that, would be my first point. And I guess for me, do you know what? I worry that we are tarnishing the sector widely with the same brush. I think we need to be careful of doing that. There are lots and lots of good practice that I see out there. There's no question at all. I don't want to sit here and say any different, because I do genuinely see that. However, we know that we're failing in certain areas, and I for one haven't been shy in saying that myself, that very much there are problems. We have broken areas of the sector, definitely. And actually, when you start to think about those competencies, one of my kind of big things on the list that I didn't add actually is we're likely to see an increase in mergers, in merging organisations. And as a result of that, we see the loss of really, really good, competent people through that process, you know, where we've got to choose between two people, and there's all sorts of political reasons why we choose one person over another, or one system over another, etc., which is causing, in my view, lots and lots of issues with the sector in terms of, you know, the quality and consistency of tone at the top, all of those things really. And who's driving those mergers in the first place? Is it, you know, the ambitious chief executive or chair of the board, or is it actually for the greater good of two organisations with the same values aligning, which is what it should be, in my view?
Agreed. I mean, I'm part of a board of a business in Birmingham that aren't merging and going through that, but inevitably the conversations about mergers come up, and the hard part is finding the values, because this business live, breathe, and value everything based on the values of their company. And I know it's something that a number of the providers in here will testify to doing the same. Mergers have been very, very damaging to the sector. I will quite happily have an argument with anybody about that. I think in general, I'm not, again, not wanting to tar everyone with the same brush, but they have, I think, in general, been quite damaging. But on the other side, quite necessary. And there's an interesting discussion there. There was also, Denise, if you go onto the Social Housing Roundtable YouTube channel, I think it was back in May or June, I'll find the date for you. There is a discussion going on in Parliament at the moment to enforce a mandatory qualification to those who work in social housing, in the same way that you do have in the NHS, in the same way you do in social care, in the same way you do in teaching, in any sector which works with anybody who's slightly vulnerable. You have to be qualified, apart from housing. And so there's a discussion there about whether or not that's going to stop people who would be interested in getting into the sector coming into it in the first place. What about everyone who's already been working in it for years? Do they then need to get qualified, etc., etc.? But the key thing that comes out of that roundtable, is actually run by a good friend of mine called Emily Orme, who's fantastic, was that there needs to be more accountability. And it's exactly what you've mentioned there. There is not enough accountability in housing, and there are people who were in roles that senior roles when the Grenfell Tower tragedy, etc., held, that either got paid off and left or found themselves in other positions. And there isn't that kind of tarnishing of reputation. It does, I agree with you, there are times where it kind of looks after itself a little bit. And it took the board to get rid of the guy from Rotherham, rather than actually him just stepping down. And again, I think there's an accountability piece there. And where there's lots of stuff going on in the chat, so I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to bring in Jessie, over to yourself. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see you.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. Sorry, it's my first roundtable, so I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with everyone already. My name's Jessie Jemison. I'm the Director of Operations for Sapphire Independent Housing. I've got a few points to come in on earlier points, and I had sort of a question for the group as well. On the point of technology, I do agree we need to prepare for a culture of immediacy. At the same time, I think we need to, and it ties in with the point just being made now, make sure that we are being driven by what adds value to the resident. The Sapphire in particular, more than 50% of our residents are either housed in a service that staff 24 hours on their one. And we found when we've perhaps had the urge to try and appear more digitally interactive with residents, they're actually saying to us, you know, in essence, why would I want to talk to you via an app or a media platform if I can just come and speak to you in a lounge? So I think I would just say that we need to get that balance right. Sometimes we can have that urge to do what looks cool, what looks interesting, but what if residents don't want to talk to us via TikTok? They might want to use that for something else. So I just think there's a balance to strike there, was just a point I had. In relation to Sarah's question on the chat around the tenant satisfaction measures, there's one challenge and risk that I think I've found within the sector, just talking to a few chief execs and heads of services, and that's around complaint handling and the methodology. You need to provide information around the number and percentage of cases of stage 1 and stage 2 complaints, but there are some providers that if a complaint escalates to stage 2 within the same year, they treat that as one complaint. So I think there's a risk of underperforming and just a variance in methodology that I've just identified. Be happy to have chats offline if others have fallen either side of that, treating that as one complaint or 2 separate complaints. But I think there's a risk there personally, both in terms of underreporting. For example, if something escalates to stage 2, which complaint then gets used for the timeliness of a response? So I think there's a further discussion that needs to be had there as far as TSMs. And then I had a question for the group around Building Safety Act, and where in context of high-rise buildings where providers have leases or apartments within a high-rise but are not the freeholder or the managing agent. I think there's some risk there as well. We have one, and we feel like we're very much driving the conversation. They're in the private sector. Thankfully, the Housing Ombudsman or looking at such arrangements is pushing for better regulation of the private sector generally. And obviously this legislation would apply to them, but I think there's some risk there. And I'm just wondering how anyone in the group is managing that risk if you have apartments within a high rise, but you're not the freeholder or managing agent. Sorry, we've had quite a few topics there, so I hope that.
That's amazing, Jesse. Like I say, great to have
you offline.
Your first roundtable. Yeah, brilliant to have you with us. Becky, any thoughts on that, or anybody else that wants to come in?
I'd love to come in on that latter point, Jesse. I have experienced the issue around the managing agents risk that you're describing for many years now, and it's not been solved yet in the sector. So there is a huge risk around this, around, you know, who's responsible for maintaining that building, insuring that building. I've seen examples where, you know, blocks that have been managed by a managing agent are double insured or not insured at all, or because there's been, you know, a misinterpretation of the contracts over the years that often grow up like Topsy, and organisations have, you know, a dozen or more different contracts with different managing agents because, you know, 20 years ago, that's what it looked like compared to what it looks like today. A real issue, huge issue, and one that I don't think the sector is solving particularly well. So I'd be really interested to hear if anybody's actually nailed that one. I ran a really large project on this in a previous housing association, and we didn't solve it. We chipped away at it, but we didn't solve it.
Anna Henderson's put in the chat there that trying to ensure third-party MAs complete fire risk assessments to the right schedule can also be very challenging. I'm part of I'm the chair of a supported exempt accommodation forum that takes place in Birmingham every kind of 6 weeks. We've got a meeting on Thursday, so I can raise it there as well, Jesse, and see whether anything comes back, because it is mainly managing agents who work in the supported exempt space, to see if there's any thoughts or profiles. But I think the whole piece around the exempt accommodation space, it doesn't take much to realise that when you just start reading some of the transcripts from some of the government meetings and things like that about it, is actually they don't really understand how it works, and that's just rolling on and on. It's definitely a massive risk. What the answer is, I'm not quite sure, but one that we definitely have to be continually aware of. Andrew, thank you for coming with us today. Do please come in with your point.
Thanks, Matt, and hi everyone. I guess just a few observations I've got. So I guess first up, though, just to say I'm not a housing practitioner. I'm an HR peddler, so I talk from a position of ignorance in a lot of these things. Also, as you might tell from my accent, I work for a Scottish-based RSL, by address or social landlord. So our regulated and political landscape's obviously entirely different. So, but I'm hoping I've got a couple of bits that might help.
I'm sure you will, Andrew. I'm certain you will.
I guess first one, and this isn't a local thing, but talking about technology, and I guess following on from Jesse's point, I think there's always a real risk, and we've certainly seen it here, where one size doesn't fit all. And I think if you rely on tech, you really run a high risk of excluding certain groups. And that isn't just about the elderly who don't like computers and things like that. You know what I mean? I think
we've a huge amount of computer illiteracy in this country, and also I think during the lockdown, so many people closed their offices and then didn't reopen, that actually people don't know how to actually even engage, because some people just want to speak to a human. So I completely agree.
Absolutely, and I guess what we've seen quite a bit of is talk about the Gen Zs. I mean, I think people my vintage think that young people know more about using the internet and computers and all that kind of stuff. And actually, there's been a real shift with the Gen Zs, because all their access is through apps. So going into like a web portal might not be as successful for them because they're just not used to that. So anyway, it was just to say, you know, I think you need to be really cautious about one size fits all. Talking about young people recruitment, something I'm very, very passionate about. In Scotland, we have a government-driven process called Developing Young Workforce, which I'm a member on our local board of. I think we talked a bit about how you advertise to young people and make them aware of your vacancies. What I would say is, from my experience, key is making yourself an employer that's attractive and a good place to work for young people is absolutely the first thing you need to do, rather than the advertising thing. One thing that I think is going to be introduced in England and Wales pretty soon, we have in Scotland, it's linked into Investors and People. It's a framework called Investors and Young People, and that focuses in the same way as IIP does, how you engage and recruit and work with and talk to and give voice to young people in your workforce. So that's something to kind of look out for. I know that so Remarkable, who ran IIP in Scotland, went into liquidation. IIP proper has taken that over, and IIYP was a Remarkable product, so they've taken that on, so you might see quite soon. Anyway, next point was on TSMs, I think it was referred to. I'm guessing that's something new in England and Wales. In Scotland, we've had what's cryptically referred to as the annual return on the charter in place for a number of years. So the Scottish Housing Regulator expects every registered social landlord to produce a series of stats every year that are then published nationally. I don't know, there might be lessons in that for people to have a look at. It's all available on the SHR's website. What I would say is so sometimes the things in there are the easy to measure things, not necessarily the right things. So to give you an example of that, the complaints measures how many complaints are concluded within 2 weeks. Now that's a ridiculous measure, because the easiest way to get 100% on that is just to tell everybody to bugger off. And then you get 100% right off the mark. So, you know, there's bits about that. And I think maybe as a sector, I would suggest maybe looking to influence that as much as you can, so that it's the right things that are getting measured. Then, sorry, and I will stop rambling in a second.
All good.
Final thing I was just going to mention, we talked about competency in the sector there. Now, I think it's a national UK-wide thing, but it might just be a Scottish thing. I know the CIH, the Chartered Institute of Housing, are very much pushing our professionalisation agenda just now. So I think there's some quite interesting conversations happening there. It's always really difficult. We have exactly the same in the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development. The professionalisation thing's hard, because what makes a professional is actually it's difficult to become a professional. So the more you do that, the less likely you are to get people to come into the profession. But there's a balance to be struck there. Anyway, we're shutting down, stop talking. But thanks for listening.
No, thank you, Andrew, and some really, really good points. And I certainly know the point you made there about the CIPD, and you know, you have a team in finance and other sectors that are very much, you have to, you know, get XYZ to move up to ABC. I think there still needs to be some kind of knowledge, and even if, I mean, Denise mentioned it before, then you have passed this qualification, so you do know X, so why are you doing Y, I think would be a start. Becky, any thoughts on some of the stuff Andrew put there? I'm going to go to the chat and then bring Denise back in.
It's interesting that you gave us a reminder, actually, of the Scottish measures that you have to publish. I'd forgotten that. Well worth a look, I would say. Highly recommend people to go and have a look at that.
Brilliant, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like, by the sounds of it, it's something. Go on, Andrew.
Sorry, Matt, I was just going to say, if it is useful, obviously our guys have been doing it for ages. If anybody is struggling with it, give me a shout. I'm happy to connect you with that. Not me. I wouldn't have the first idea how to help you. But I'm sure we've got guys here who would be quite happy to kind of share experiences.
Andrew, can I also just ask about the managing agent? So is there anything in Scotland that we're missing a trick on there?
Pass.
Okay.
I'll admit ignorance, not a clue. It's not really something that we, as a housing association, get involved in up here. We have our own properties that we manage and let, and it's a full service thing, so we don't tend to use external agents.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, definitely worth exploring though. I'll probably go away and do some research myself, but thank you.
There's the Supported Housing Networking Group is meeting next week, by the way, online for anybody who wants to. That's run with Eden Bailey, and we've got Michael Patterson coming on, and it's all about managing agents. So if you want to come again, reach out to me there. I put a post up online the other day about wearing many hats, and I feel like they're all coming to the fore. A couple of things just in the chat. Claire Patterson, I'm seeing more people interested in the values and principles of the business they work for and buy from. Housing should be concentrating on achieving their core purpose of safe homes to attract recruits. Of course, housing should be focusing on this anyway, but I agree. There are plenty of good news stories if businesses are doing things correctly. You need to be getting them out there. You need to be showcasing them. And the amount of people I speak to, particularly in senior management, who are looking for new roles because they feel their business culture has changed. But what they're struggling to then find is the actual culture of a new business without it just kind of being told by one person. And unfortunately, selling is easy when you're just having one conversation with another person. Anna Henderson, LH residents also have the right to change and elect management organisations, so the frequency of change does not allow for constructive relationships to be built. Another risk, most certainly, Becky's mentioned there, 64% of Gen Zers prefer smart rent interaction, so stats to back that thinking. And I think it's exactly that point that Andrew and Jesse have made. You've got to have different mediums of way to talk to people. One size doesn't fit all, but you've also got to be willing to embrace this new technology, because otherwise you are missing out, and that balance is very, very difficult. Bob's had to go, and Shirley Davis has put there actually a report on the Scottish Social Housing Charters. That's well worth a look. Denise, I'm going to bring you back in. Thank you for coming.
Hi again. I just wanted to comment again about the competencies. And I am Chartered Institute, chartered member, blah, 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 qualified. I don't know how many years back. And at the time, I thought the training was a load of rubbish. But now, 20 odd years later, I realised just how solid it was. But I'm just thinking in terms of when you were saying that there needs to be a balance between those, the professionalism, and maybe those that might not be able to get in if the bar was set higher. But for me, I just feel that social housing needs to contextualize better the groups that they're dealing with, and quite often they are vulnerable groups. They're the groups that don't necessarily know their rights, they don't have access to a lot of legal things, so they're actually dependent on the professional to act in a competent and professional manner. And I'm sort of like thinking as an example, ASB, that which involves a lot of legislation, a lot of partnership working, and you do need eye-level competencies in order to sort of like execute that. And then I'm thinking like, one of the points that I think people are missing is that these could end in harm, fatalities, and all sorts of things. So it's sort of like who's being prioritized, the tenants and service users, blah, 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 or the actual social housing sector and people's salaries and blah, blah. I just think that again, I'm saying it's frustrating me around the competencies, and you would not expect to put your family into a nursing home or whatever and have a load of people that you don't even know what their background is, their training. There's no bleeding CRB checks. You've got contractors swanning around. You don't know if they're rapists or whatever. And I just think the social housing sector need to get a grip. And that's it.
No, completely appreciate it. And
I'll shut up.
There were plenty of nods going on, and you've got a lot of agreement behind you. Andrew, I'm going to bring you back in on that point.
Yeah, it was just to follow up on Denise's point there. I think, I mean, my own view is professionalism isn't about qualifications or knowledge. It's about ethics. It's about professional practice and those more nebulous things. And I think to CIH colleagues on the call, I think that's what the institute needs to focus in on. Is not about the qualification that you have, because frankly, you know, that's a measure of your academic ability, not about how professional you are. It's about, like I said, your ethical standards, your integrity, your professional practice. So, and that covers, I think, all those points that you're raising, Denise. And I think we touched on earlier as well about chief executives being forced to resign. Ridiculous in that situation. You know what? I know I'm preaching to the converted, so I'll shut up again.
No, you're not at all. And it's a really interesting, there's so much that goes into it. There's so many narratives, I think, around this piece, and trying to get that balance right. There will always be something which someone will disagree with, or there'll be an idea. But I think the key thing anyway, at the core of it, is how do we make housing more accountable? And how do we make ourselves more accountable to actual the problems that go on? And is professionalism, qualifications the way to do it? There's going to be arguments on both sides. Becky's put in the chat that I'm aware people have probably got another meeting coming up, so I just want to kind of do the little bit of a wrap up. Becky Tucker's put in the chat she is launching a CPD program in February called Toolbox Pro for risk managers, focusing on doing the day job well rather than collecting certificates for your CV. So please reach out to Becky for anything to do with that. I've put in the chat the mailing list for the roundtables. Not only will you get the recording for this episode, but you'll get notifications for all future ones. So please follow that if you'd like to continue the journey that we're trying to put on here. Sarah Russell could talk about ethics all night. She's a solicitor. Having a qualification system doesn't install ethics. I think that's definitely going to be a massive part of the problem. And Shirley said, I remember the time you had to have a CIOH qualification to be a housing officer and get on the housing career ladder. The circle will continue. Like ever, housing is a very cyclical piece. Becky, a massive thank you to you. Are there any final points you'd just like to make before we wrap up today?
I think absolutely brilliant conversation, everybody. Really lovely, and thank you for having me. I'm always excited to be talking about risk. Said nobody ever but me, but it's been really great to be here. Thank you, everybody.
No, absolutely wonderful. And I think there's so many things. I will be putting up a LinkedIn post around this and trying to kind of do some of the highlights. The recording will go up onto the YouTube channel. We've talked a lot about kind of tenant satisfaction. We didn't get even on to very much about oddly damp and mould, all the shortfall in building homes today, but there is so much that is in this sector. We will definitely revisit it. If anyone wants to get in touch with me from a recruitment side, please reach out to me via LinkedIn or my email, matt.baird@district4.io. But for now, thank you absolutely everybody for joining today. It's been brilliant having the roundtable back. Next week we have Grant Hyatt joining us, which is where we'll be discussing the community effect of supported housing ASB and the links between the two. So another really interesting piece. Mercy, I would love to invite Quajo to one of these. I absolutely would, but whether or not he'd join, I know he's a very busy man. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you all at a future event. And take care. Cheers.
Thank you.